everybody to welcome everybody to the Casita Coalition's ADU Best Practice webinar series. This is a series of conversations with some of the state's most innovative local agencies and nonprofits that are taking the state ADU law as a base and doubling down and doing something interesting and innovative to create better, more inclusive small housing options throughout the state of California. Today, we're highlighting Sacramento. And as we get started, I'd just like to thank our major sponsors for the webinar series, Union Bank and Facebook, and also our sponsors, the Stowers team of Cross Country Mortgage, Umpqua Bank, BIA Bay Area, Bridge Association of Realtors, and Alan Matkins. And then of my thank you list is also extended to all of our promotional partners. Casita Coalition works often in partnership with like-minded policy organizations. And today we've been joined with the California Department of Housing and Community Development, UC Berkeley's Turner Center, the Association of Bay Area, Sacramento, and Southern California Governments, Build It Green, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, Bay Area Council, SPUR, Faith Bay, California Planning Roundtable, California YIMBY, and Circulate San Diego. So thanks everybody for joining the small housing conversation statewide. The results far have been really impressive across the state with tens of thousands of ADUs in just a few years. So thank you all very much for your work, and we look forward to the conversation today. Just a few other business updates. The Casita Coalition is hiring a new policy associate. Please take a look at our website or LinkedIn page for the job description. We're hoping for young folks who really want to be engaged in the housing policy to come with us and train and get active in the small housing policy work with the Casita Coalition. And then also please check our website for our recent policy guidance memos developed by our working groups. Our hardworking working groups, including a garage conversion guidance memo and finance guide. For those of you who are working in the ADU space, we're happy to announce the Supreme Court decision that allows in-place ADU income to be used to help a homeowner qualify for a mortgage. So that's going to be very important in helping expand finance available for ADU borrowers. So thanks for all the members of the coalition and our friends across the country who've been active in bringing this issue to the attention of the federal government. And we invite you, if you're interested in this kind of work, to please join our working groups. Check out and send us an email at info@casitacoalition.org if you're interested in joining us for this work. And now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Steve Hansen. Steve has served on the Sacramento City Council for 8 years from 2012 to 2020 and is one of the most impressive leading voices in the smart growth, transportation, economic development, and innovation in government, including housing policy. He served on a variety of policy leadership boards in Sacramento, including Air Quality District, Transportation Authority, and so forth. A number of boards related to downtown Sacramento improvements, and he has been the chair of the California Local Government Commission. So we welcome Steve today to give some remarks as we kick off our City of Sacramento webinar series. Welcome, Steve. It's always a pleasure to see you and hear your good ideas. So thanks for joining us today.
Good morning, Denise. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And thank you to the Casita Coalition for inviting Sacramento to share some of what we've learned and experienced over the last decade as we've worked to democratize housing development here in the city. First, one of the things that's often not in the very kind introductions is why I came to this work. I grew up precariously housed after my parents divorced. We moved, I think, 9 times before I went to live with my dad when I turned 10. And I saw firsthand what the impacts of being precariously housed had on our family, my brother, my mother. And when I decided to run for office, it was with that adverse background in my head, thinking, how do we as public officials, assuming that we can get elected, change the trajectory of the lives of people like I had hoped somebody would do for me for the better. And one of the biggest things here in California that has been an obstacle, and it's been a generation plus in the making, is the lack of housing creation. Housing creation, not just in Sacramento, but all over the state, was really stymied post Prop 13 because it changed incentives for local jurisdictions to create tax revenue through housing creation. And so a lot of cities devalued and disincentivized housing creation in favor of sales tax and commercial properties. Compounded with that were other no growth and NIMBY policies that made it very difficult. Redlining is a classic example of those policies to build multifamily housing, infill housing, the kind of things that really help a city thrive. And so as I came into office, Sacramento had, especially in our core, urban core, seen over 50 years a decline in population of almost 50%. And much of the housing that had existed was torn down during the infamous period of urban revitalization in the 60s, 70s. Freeways were built where housing used to be. Office buildings were put where housing used to be. And then we had a lot of surface parking lots, sort of the Joni Mitchell paved paradise and put up a parking lot. And so about the time I came into office in 2012, the city had gone through a project in my neighborhood that I was involved in. Ultimately, we won a US EPA Smart Growth Award around, but it taught us a lot. It was an affordable housing project on a light rail stop with commercial. It had been a brownfield site, and it was zero net energy and mixed use. And so the number of approvals, the time it took, the community opposition, even though we ultimately won a US EPA Smart Growth Award for it, was a clear reason why the city, and with the help of then Mia King at Domus Development and other leaders, we decided we were going to revamp our entire planning development code. And by doing that, our goal was realizing that costs in the Bay Area were the same costs we would pay for labor and materials. We would always be uncompetitive when it came to housing creation for some of those basic economic reasons. But during the Great Recession, the city saw a huge oversupply of single family homes as that 90s and early 2000s sprawl, single family zoning reared its head because it was very financeable. When infill development was discouraged through high fees, high regulatory barriers, etc., we were oversupplied with single-family homes at the end of the Great Recession, and we really had a dearth of multifamily infill projects. That not only was a housing issue, but what we saw was our small businesses in the core and in these other neighborhoods that were dependent on employees really suffered because there weren't the rooftops there to support a more holistic economy. So that became our inflection point. And from there, we decided not only were we going to push down approvals to the lowest level possible, and we spent years doing that. We created parking, we waived parking minimums in certain places. Later, we capped parking with maximums. We were trying to really create a value proposition. We created fee incentives. And ultimately, last year, this culminated in a comprehensive plan to do ministerial housing approval. Many jurisdictions have in their leadership, in their community, the ability to fix this housing problem. Most leaders are afraid to tackle these issues because they don't want to be criticized for changing neighborhoods. But we can, through local control, fix this problem. I do think there's a great role for the state. But I saw this firsthand when I bought my 1906 house, which had been moved during redevelopment, used to have a unit under it. And then in 2016, I had long planned to build it, but I broke my leg. And so I built an ADU under where I'm sitting right now in high water for American Foursquare style house. And so I got to not only be a customer of our city process, but I also got to be somewhat a beneficiary of a lot of these efforts that we had done to democratize housing. And maybe where I'll finish here is on a few points. One, there's a lot of consternation about large projects. the cost of them, the money behind them, etc. When we weave in density and we allow homeowners to create these units, not only to supplement their own income, but potentially to be places for their children to live, their parents to live, we've empowered people from the grassroots to weave in density throughout our neighborhoods, create more economic sustainability, and I think put a different face on what is easy to mischaracterize as developers. I think the financing has been a key along changes in financing, but also in the planning and development codes to streamline and make these type of units ministerial. But it did take a partnership, and these are the last 2 points, a partnership between the elected officials to show some courage and vision, to give staff the comfort to lead the way in making the policy changes. It took great staff, starting with our city manager on down, to be comfortable that we had their backs to go out and really revolutionize our planning and development code to democratize housing at all levels of affordability. And it took community partners. We're an older city. We have a lot of housing stock on large lots that is single family or minimally built. So we are well positioned to create this kind of infill development, missing middle housing, weave it in. And that community partnership was really critical because we had support to do this. We weren't talking about mid-rises or high-rises. We were talking about creating stronger, better neighborhoods. Lastly, I think the future here is going to be around ADUs that are prefab, manufactured. Some people call it industrialized housing. Where here I had to build within the four walls of our house because there had been a unit there and it was already ready to go. A lot of people find it easier to build ground up, replace a garage. And I think whether it's connection fees, whether it's ensuring that you don't have to have a separate address, separate water, garbage, sewer service like we did here, containing those costs through pre-designed, pre-manufactured housing probably also gives those homeowners who are trying to step into a role that they're not used to around development some security around costs. And when you have to build everything custom, then it really changes your cost portfolio. I hope that that's a good start to this conversation. Matt, Hertel, Garrett, Norman, our team are just the consummate professionals as we look to change our general plan to upzone across the city, modeled after Minneapolis and Oregon. I think we can continue as Sacramento, not just to be the state capital when it comes to state level policy, but to show cities throughout the state of all sizes that if you can do it yourself, you can probably do it in a way that the community prefers. But in the same way, if you're not willing to do it, the state should still step in. We have been a leader, and we think our policies are the gold standard, and it's great to be here today with everyone to talk about what the City of Sacramento has done.
That's great, and we really appreciate your leadership when you were on the council and continuing to develop gold standards in localities where local folks take the initiative to be really good quality leaders, respond to the community concerns, and make these important changes. So thank you for your leadership. And I want to now bring in Matt Hertel, who's the long-range planning manager for the City of Sacramento, and Garrett Norman, the associate planner for the city working on ADU policy. Matt and Garrett, we look forward to hearing the Sacramento Gold Standard.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Denise, for the introduction. And Steve, thank you very much for setting the table. Really appreciate all of your leadership. We wouldn't be able to do a lot of this without you, and just really appreciate you moving these important housing policies and land use policy forward. So Garrett and I are going to tag team this presentation for you today, and I'm going to kick it off, and we'll move through some of the things that we're doing, and then looking forward to having a nice discussion. All right, so we'll spend a few minutes walking through some of the housing challenges facing Sacramento and some of our recent and upcoming initiatives to increase the affordability and availability of housing. So to help set the context, the city of Sacramento is 101 square miles and has a population of about 513,000. But like many cities, we are experiencing substantial growth. And by 2040, our city is projected to grow by 69,000 new housing units and 77,000 new jobs. So we are currently conducting 3 major planning efforts: our 2040 general plan, our climate action and adaptation plan, and our housing element, or 8-year housing strategy. And these planning processes are about determining what type of city we want to be and how we're going to address the challenges facing our city over the next 20 years. Through over 2 years of outreach, several priorities have risen to the top, including climate change, equity and inclusive economic development, and of course, housing. Residents have stated that they want a city where folks of all backgrounds and with varying income levels can afford to live. The draft housing element will be adopted in August, and the draft general plan will be available for public review in September. And these both include thoughtful but meaningful responses to our most pressing challenges. The 2021 to 2029 housing element planning period housing target is 45,580 housing units. And if the city is to meet this target, we must produce about 5,700 units annually across all income levels. And because of all this great work that Steve talked about, in 2020 was our largest number of new housing units produced since 2006. And with 33% of these new housing units to be affordable to residents making less than $48,000 per year, or less than 80% of the area median income. So really a great year for us. However, even in this banner year, we were still 2,000 units short to meet our actual need. And to meet our lower income housing need through only regulated affordable housing, we would need to find $7.5 billion in the next 8 years, with the City of Sacramento's portion being $2 billion. And in order for us to meet this tremendous need for lower cost housing, yes, we must build more regulated affordable housing, but we also must build more lower cost housing that does not require subsidy, such as manufactured housing, accessory dwelling units, and duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. As part of our housing element, we've identified many policies and about 50 housing programs under 8 overarching goals, as shown here. No single policy or program will solve the housing crisis on its own. It'll take many policies, programs, and a strong funding commitment from the federal, state, and local governments to begin to tackle the tremendous need. Today, we're going to touch on 3 of these goals. Goal 1 is to facilitate the construction of the 45,000 new housing units by 2029. And this is directly related to our regional housing needs allocation. Streamlining the approval and increasing the production of housing has been a priority for the city. And in May 2019, City Council directed staff to implement the Housing Streamlining Menu of Options, a collection of potential actions that the city's planning division and other city departments and partner agencies could initiate to streamline the approval and production of market rate and affordable housing. At that time, we also established a housing policy working group to vet, prioritize, and identify actionable next steps. And since then, we've been implementing these actions and have folded them into our housing element programs. Pictured here is a pretty recent project in Midtown, 19J. It includes micro units that start at 277 square feet and was really one of the first product types like this in Sacramento. Has a total of 173 units. Okay, with that, I'm going to kick it over to Garrett to walk us through this slide.
Thank you, Matt, and hello, and thank you again for letting us share the City of Sacramento's story. My name is Garrett Mormon, and I work primarily with the zoning administrator on amendments to our planning and development code. One amazing project I helped manage was what we called our ad hoc ordinance to help streamline development review process. The impetus behind this was from our Planning Design Commission. They formed an ad hoc subcommittee to try and find ways to streamline non-controversial projects. As part of their effort, they took 2 trips to Portland, Oregon to learn more about best practices in this realm. One unique thing about Portland is that they do not have regular public hearings for current development projects, but rather they have a very robust public engagement on the development of their comprehensive plans. The idea is that they hold all public outreach and testimony during the comprehensive plan stage. So once development is proposed, it is either consistent with the plan and zoning and thus can be built, or it's not consistent. The debate on the appropriateness of the proposed use is already decided and thus doesn't need additional discretionary review through long drawn out public hearings. So our ad hoc committee was interested in taking portions of the Oregon model and see how it can be applied to the City of Sacramento within the regulatory framework provided by the state of California. What we ended up doing was a large ordinance that amended several portions of the Planning and Development Code to streamline high priority projects such as housing, in addition to routine non-controversial projects that support goals and policies of our general plan. For example, we lowered the level of review for multi-unit housing to be by right in permitted zones, regardless of the number of units. These projects can be approved at a staff level as long as they meet density and development standards. We also allow all tentative subdivision maps to be heard at our director or zoning administrator level, regardless of the number of new lots proposed. We eliminated some conditional use permit requirements or lowered the review to the director level. And lastly, we allow all deviations to development standards to be heard at the director level. In our code, deviations are similar to variances, but without the requirement to make the finding for a hardship. Lowering review to the director level is critical because these meetings occur every week, which helps with agenda management and moving projects through faster. However, the critical piece to justify the streamlining was to put more emphasis on public engagement, particularly at the beginning of the review process. As a result, we changed our procedures to put a real estate style sign, as you can see on the screen, on the project site for all of our current development applications as soon as the project is first routed for review. And we also expanded our routings and public hearing mailings to neighborhood groups and residents as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Garrett. So I'll pick it up for another minute. So in 2017, the state passed SB 35. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, to streamline housing development for jurisdictions not meeting their regional housing needs allocation. And in July 2020, the City of Sacramento became the first city in the state to create a local version of SB 35, our ministerial approval of infill housing. The city's version removes some of the obstacles to taking advantage of SB 35. It does not require prevailing wage or a certain percentage of units to be regulated affordable units. And since going into effect 10 months ago, we've had 8 projects for a total of 926 housing units that have taken advantage of this process, and another 500 housing units are pending applications. We approve all these applications within either 60 days or 90 days, depending on the size of the project. All right, I'm going to turn it back to Garrett to walk us through ADUs.
Thank you. So goal 3 of the housing element is to facilitate the construction of at least 700 accessory dwelling units by 2029. We do expect to exceed this goal, but the state is requiring us to be conservative in our projections. Next slide, please. So another key project that I have been spearheading in the city is the city's ADU ordinance and our new ADU program. So first, I'll discuss our development standards and our current efforts in getting an ordinance adopted. Next, I will discuss our new ADU program and toolkit. We have many new and exciting products and information coming soon. Lastly, I will discuss a proposed public outreach plan to showcase our new ADU program in addition to other ongoing efforts. So in December of 2019, our city council adopted an interim emergency ordinance so we would have a consistent code with the revised state regulations that went into effect on January 1st of 2020. Now we are in the process of taking our, what I like to call permanent ADU ordinance back to council, which was actually set for next Tuesday, since the emergency ordinance was only temporary. In a way, this was good because we got to operate under the state's new guidelines for a while to better understand its implementation pros and cons. So a couple differences about our regulations is we allow 2 ADUs on any lot with no density limitations. The ADUs can be attached, detached, or it could be a JADU or a junior ADU. The only limitation is for 2 detached ADUs, they cumulatively cannot exceed 1,200 square feet. We allow all ADUs to be the same height as the base zone in which they're located, which is 35 feet in our lower residential zones. We also do not require a setback on the ground floor for the interior side yard, as long as the ADU is greater than 60 feet from the front property line. With our new ordinance, we are proposing to further streamline some of these standards by also not requiring a rear yard setback for the ground floor and exempting ADUs from lot coverage without setbacks if they are 800 square feet. So for a couple lessons learned, we were trying to further streamline these standards by exempting all ADUs from lot coverage up to 1,200 square feet And we were also proposing to allow all attached ADUs to be up to 1,200 square feet or 50% of the primary dwelling. ADUs have always been supported in the city and are typically non-controversial, but the city is looking at the missing middle housing zoning right now, which Matt will go into more here in a minute, which has caused a lot of commotion in the community. And well, once the NIMBY community got wind of what was being proposed in the ADU ordinance, they attacked it and said we should not exceed the state's minimums. So some of our streamlined efforts have been stripped back from our original proposal. In fact, we were asked by our long legislation committee to require a parking space for ADUs, which has not been required in the city since 2017. So staff is in the process of briefing all of the council members to explain why parking really is not necessary in the city once you apply the half-mile buffer limitation for public transit as required by state law. So using tools like GIS to communicate this information is extremely helpful. So for the big lesson here is pay attention to the timing of other controversial policy efforts. We think if we did this ADU ordinance ahead of the missing middle housing, it would have been less controversial. We just kind of got wrapped into it. Next slide, please. So now on to some exciting information about our new ADU program or toolkit. We were awarded grant monies from the state as part of SB2, which we are using to help make our ADU program. We have a few tools and resources we intend on offering and are in the process of creating them now after we just selected our consultant team to begin working. The first effort is to create a robust one-stop shop, if you will, webpage devoted entirely to ADUs. We imagine this being very comprehensive to talk about all considerations involved when building an ADU, such as the zoning, building, fire requirements, in addition to realistic expectations about water and power utilities, easement locations, overhead power lines, etc. Next, we'll take the highlights of the webpage and translate it into a brochure that can be passed out at our outreach events and also have them available at all of the city's public counters, like the animal shelter, the revenue division services counter, in addition to the development services permit counter. Another item we will be providing is permit-ready plans or pre-approved plans. The plans will be Title 24 energy compliant with appropriate reporting that accounts for all cardinal directions. They will be fully accessible units with mobility and communication features. They will also be conventional plans that don't require an architecture or engineering stamp. This allows staff to modify plans with code cycle updates without re-engaging the architect. And they will be cheaper to build by design and easier to construct. And we'll also provide 3 models, all of which will have designs that meet fire and building codes for being within 3 feet of a property line. So it allows greater flexibility for placement on the lot. Another tool we'll be offering is we'll be contracting with the company Symbium. If you not have heard of them, I suggest looking at their webpage. They offer a free product that everyone can explore with now. But this is essentially an interactive map program that incorporates the city's specific ADU development standards, and it will allow homeowners the ability to go online, pick various designs that they have programmed into their model, and it'll include the city's pre-approved plans to see how it will fit within their backyard by moving the actual footprint of the ADU around on an aerial image that shows the property lines of the homeowner's lot. Lastly, another item that we are excited to offer is another informational tool is a case study, a video case study. We intend on interviewing a couple perspectives, such as using the ADU for multi-generational family purposes versus as a rental income source. We will examine key considerations during the process from the beginning planning stages to the permitting and construction phases. We'll also examine financial barriers and considerations, and we expect to provide this video on social media platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, so everybody has the opportunity to learn a little bit more about constructing ADUs. Lastly, we intend on having an aggressive outreach plan since there's so much interest in ADUs. This would likely consist of roadshows, ADU boot camps that are organized events for developers and community members to learn, and ADU tours and showcase events that look at completed ADUs and potentially site visits to like a factory prefab business. We're also looking at financial assistance program as part of the updated housing element. The city will find funding sources and community partners to develop and implement a financial assistance program that would provide loans or grants to encourage homeowners to construct an ADU with an agreement to charge rent affordable for lower income households or rent the ADU to housing choice voucher participants. We intend to continue our outreach efforts by attending events and webinars such as this, and further create partnerships with ADU builders to help further streamline the permitting process. And lastly, here's a graph that depicts our planning and building permit activity for ADUs since 2013. We have noticed that ADU interest has significantly increased in the last couple of years, whereby the number of planning applications has nearly doubled from 2019 to 2020. As you can see, in 2020, we had 162 planning applications and we issued a total of 76 building permits.
Great, thank you very much, Garrett. I'm going to take back over and talk a little bit about another housing element goal, goal 4, is to advance equity and inclusion and create more equitable, inclusive neighborhoods. This is something we have woven throughout the housing element and developed policies and programs. But under the housing element goal of advancing equity and inclusion, we're coming to grips with our own land use history of racial and socioeconomic segregation. Throughout the country, including here in Sacramento, redlining maps were used by financial institutions to assess the level of risk for making home loans. Red areas, as shown in the map on the left, were described as racial hazards, where infiltration of subversive races has occurred. Yellow areas were seen to be declining for having multifamily housing in existing minority populations. In this way, not only were minority groups not granted government-backed home loans with favorable terms in their own neighborhoods, but were also prohibited from moving to many of the best and still desirable green and blue neighborhoods through racial restrictive covenants. And yet, while the Fair Housing Act of 1968 outlawed racially restrictive covenants and government-sponsored redlining, the effects of past systemic segregation and exclusion in housing are still apparent in many areas of Sacramento today. As shown in yellow on the zoning district map, 70% of Sacramento's neighborhoods are zoned for single family, equating to almost half of the city's 101 square miles of land. State housing element law requires jurisdictions to comply with AB 686 to affirmatively further fair housing. And this means taking meaningful actions to overcome patterns of segregation, address disparities in housing needs and access to opportunity, and foster inclusive communities. The primary action cities can take is to provide more lower cost housing options in the highest opportunity areas of our city. Sacramento continues to experience a housing shortage, and duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are considered missing middle housing types and are less expensive than single unit homes. Majority of the city's neighborhoods are currently zoned for single unit homes, the most expensive housing type to own or rent. And the exclusion of lower cost housing types prevents many residents from moving to neighborhoods with good parks, schools, employment, and other desirable amenities. These missing middle housing types are not only more affordable rental options, but would provide opportunities for entry-level home ownership. There are over 2,300 duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes that exist in Sacramento today. Some examples of these housing types are shown here. But as you can imagine, there's been a lot of community interest in this particular policy change that would once again permit these housing types in all city neighborhoods. This strong community interest is demonstrated by these two competing yard signs shown here. It's important to understand that there's also a national conversation taking place about the role of land use and zoning, with many states and cities taking actions to allow a great array of housing types in single-family zones. On the local level, cities like Minneapolis and Portland have also changed their land use and zoning regulations to allow a wider range of small-scale, multi-unit housing in all of their residential neighborhoods. And earlier this month, Charlotte City Council approved a growth plan that would allow duplexes and triplexes throughout the city. Grand Rapids, the second biggest city in Michigan, has been permitting more units in areas traditionally zoned single family for over a decade. And many cities in California, including Berkeley, South San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, have received council direction to study allowing a great array of housing types. On the state level, Oregon allows a variety of housing types in any city of more than 10,000 people. And of course, California is considering SB 9, which would allow homeowners in the state to divide their property into 2 lots and allow 2 homes to be built on each of those lots. On the regional level, the Sacramento Area Council of Governments Housing Policy Toolkit is a menu of policy options and best practices for removing governmental constraints to new housing. And one of SACOG's recommendations is to expand missing middle zoning and to allow for duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes on all residentially zoned land. Additionally, San Mateo County is currently completing a countywide study on missing middle housing, which they expect to be complete by September. President Biden's American Jobs Plan acknowledges the seriousness of the national housing crisis and calls out local exclusionary zoning laws like single unit zoning as a major contributor to inflated housing and construction costs. Biden's plan recommends a new competitive grant program that awards funding to jurisdictions that take concrete steps to eliminate zoning barriers. In January of this year, City Council directed staff to proceed with a draft land use map and other key strategies for the purposes of preparing the draft 2040 general plan, which we hope to adopt in March of 2022, including the key strategy of permitting a great array of housing types in single unit neighborhoods. And even though City Council provided unanimous direction for staff to proceed with this key strategy, we are still about a year and a half away from the effective date. The slide shows the 2 key milestones for this policy to take effect. The 2040 general plan is slated for adoption in about 10 months. And once the general plan is adopted, the city's planning and development code, commonly referred to as the zoning code, would be updated in 2022 with updated definitions and development standards. It's anticipated that the effective date would be by the fall of 2022. So that concludes our presentation. Happy to have a conversation and answer any questions you may have.
Great, that is fabulous. Thank you so much for all your thought leadership. This presentation summarizes a lot of the mission statement of the City Coalition. It's really heartening to see so many cities taking the initiative on their own to promote small housing forms as a naturally affordable way to get more missing middle housing built and to have neighborhoods that are more equitable and inclusive. So thank you for all your work in that. And we really look forward to seeing how this rolls out. So keep us in the loop, and especially as you do things like your video series or your roadshow materials, make sure that you send those to City Coalition so we can share them out statewide, and other folks can monitor your progress as well. We're now going to move to the question and answer part of the conversation, where we'll be once again joined by Steve and by Jared Basler, who's the co-founder of Maxable Space and a Casita Coalition board member. And typically what we do during these Q&As is we have a conversation that tries to tease out key aspects of the presentation that we think might be interesting or helpful to other communities around the state, other planning directors or other ADU practitioners. So before we get going, Jared, do you just want to say hello and a few words, since you're the only face we haven't met yet on the webinar? And
yeah, you guys, if you've been to any of the previous webinars, you've seen me during the Q&A panels. But Jared Basler, co-founder of Maxable. I also chair the ADU coalition down here in San Diego. And like Denise said, I sit on the board of the Casita Coalition. I've been designing and permitting ADUs since before 2017, and it's gotten a lot easier. But you know, it's great to see some of the progress you guys have made, and yeah, looking forward to a good discussion.
Great. Well, we have a couple questions in the Q&A to get us kicked off. I think there's a lot of interest statewide in what does a pre-approved plan program look like? How does it work? There are different models that have emerged in some of the northern counties. The pre-approved plan program is really an attempt to provide design guidance rather than an actual building permit set of plans, just sort of idea inspiration. So designs are more perhaps traditional. In other parts of the state, Los Angeles, San Jose, the pre-approved plan program is a rolling open admission for any architect, any builder, any modular builder to get their plans pre-approved to make it easier and quicker for planning staff and homeowners to get that, building permits seal of approval and get into construction. Can you guys talk a little bit about your pre-approved plan program and whether your plans are done ready to be issuing a building permit or through CDs, or just kind of talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we we talked a lot about this internally, to try and figure what would be the best approach to offer a product. And I think there's a lot of interest from the community in offering pre-approved plans from what we heard. So ultimately, we decided to proceed with this. And so what we will offer is a plan that, as building division has already reviewed, it's code compliant, it's ready to issue the permit. The only step that needs to be completed is that the homeowner has to create a site plan, right? So we have to verify the zoning requirements, which are pretty lax, but also the fire separation distance and everything for if it's adjacent to a property line. So that's the one missing piece that the homeowner will still have to complete. But as I mentioned with our pre-approved plans, we're trying to create flexibility. So we are having options where they will have fire rated walls if they are within 3 feet of a property line. So it gives the homeowner greater flexibility for site placement to meet their own individual lot needs.
Yeah, one thing that you guys mentioned was, obviously you have the Title 24 all ran, and anytime you're doing a pre-approved plan, you've got to at least plan out that portion in order to make sure it works in all situations. We talk about the site plan and the stuff that still needs to be done there. How are you guys handling? Well, I guess the question is the Title 24 done prescriptively, or is it done in a way where you would, because we typically would still have to register with that with Cal certs, or have it registered with the state. So is that going to be something that you do with the city for that homeowner, or is that something that the homeowner would need find a provider to do that?
We didn't have much discussion in that yet, since we're still in the process of developing it, but so I can't give you an affirmative answer on that, but I imagine it may be something where we have the homeowner do it, or maybe we have a process in place that helps them bridge that gap there.
Yeah, I know that the presentation, you have a lot kind of built in there. So I was just trying to understand, because that as seeing a lot of these pre-approved plan programs come through, there's holes that homeowners don't think of, and homeowners don't understand. Some jurisdictions require a lot more to go on that site plan other than just the zoning information, whether it's the stormwater or utility connections. And so really having a good education process for the homeowners will help further streamline things, just with that process. One thing I did want to ask about, and it kind of gets to this point, is that when we insert a lot of homeowners into a process that's primarily designed for professionals, they typically need more help. And given that you have building divisions and zoning, one of the in the data that you provided, talking about the number of applications versus the number of permits, just wondering what kind of areas you're seeing people stop the process, because obviously, you'd like to see the same number of applications and the same number of permits issued, but it's, roughly about 50% or a little bit less than 50% actually make it all the way through. So have you guys looked at any of the data about why projects are not being taken to completion?
Well, I think 2020 is probably a little bit of a unique data point, because we see a lot of linkages to the California Building Code, right? And so we know that when the California Building Code is about to change, folks are really aggressive in getting their applications in, because they've already been through a process, whether it be ADUs or any other development. So I think that probably inflated it a bit, and it also doesn't show which ones were submitted in December or November and weren't really ready to get move it through. I do expect that we'll see that bump in 2021 in terms of permit issue. But yeah, it's good to dig in and to understand what some of those barriers are, because I think financing has been one of those big barriers, and I'm really excited to hear about hopefully being able to count future revenues from your ADU to be able to get you some financing, because that has certainly been a barrier. And I don't think some folks really understand the total cost of what it's going to take to get you there, to get it built. and rent it out or use for your own purposes. And so that's our toolkit, is going to be step by step, walking folks through not our own process, but all the things to consider, because it may not be right for everyone. And they want, eyes wide open, right, as you move through this process.
Yeah.
I just want to
And I might just
clarify
add-
that the Supreme
Go
Court
ahead,
case
Denise.
is not about ADUs that don't exist yet. It's if you have an ADU, you can count the income towards your loan. Baby stepping in the right direction, but we still have if the ADU doesn't exist yet, no, you can't count the income thing. We got to keep working on with the federal government. Sorry, Steve did.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add a couple things. I think financing is huge. When I did it, I had some upfront money I'd saved over time. I ended up doing a cash out refi because I had equity. And then later, we were so over budget because of unexpected costs that weren't really to do with the city process that I had to get a HELOC to sort of finish it out. I think a lot of people at the beginning are more ambitious and optimistic about costs, but that's something I think we're learning, is that the more predictable the unit, if it's been built before, the better we can identify the costs versus all custom like we had to do. The other thing that's really been interesting is the just absolute drying up of available contractors to build these units. In Sacramento, so much of the work, when we got stuck at home during the shelter in place, people started renovating everything. And these ground up units are not necessarily a big profit center for the kind of contractors that look to do them. Bathroom renovation, kitchen renovation, they're going to be a more surefire profit center. So I think they chose to do less of these. And the last thing I'd say is we got our planning approval in 1 year, but we actually built in the next year because of some of the other things we had to do to get project ready. So while we got entitled in 2016, we got a building permit in 2017. So I bet the applications, and maybe Matt or Garrett can say, but how many of those applications were actually approved and then went into building permit? That's a little bit of gap in that slide that might help us understand where homeowners have approvals and might be looking to put together the rest of their financing and package.
Yeah, and that's why, looking at the raw numbers that you provide are, great to provide some context, but there's that extra portion that really kind of tells the story. And one thing that just, I know you talked about, changes to the process for a lot of different housing types. Have you guys done anything specific regarding ADU processes other than the pre-approved plan, but to address some, whether there are process inefficiencies currently in, Sacramento's permitting process, or to just help streamline? Because obviously we've got the 60-day, rule from the state, but obviously another kind of in that larger context of how many have been approved and how many have been applied for, a lot of that can come down to process development. I see you guys have done a lot on policy and a lot on, looking at how you're going to promote this, but what have you guys done as far as process development?
Yeah, good question. So we do spend a lot of time coordinating with our building division. We do work closely together, but although, being in a bigger jurisdiction, we're also very separate, and we do our own thing sometimes. So I've really kind of been trying to bridge that communication and making sure that the planners are really educated on all of the issues that may come up in the building realm, because as soon as you can communicate that information to the homeowner at the beginning of the stage, when they're still kind of in the design phase, or let's say they just submitted the planning, it's nice to be, hey, you should watch out for this. Planning may not have a concern, but building certainly will, because it violates a building code or something. So just trying to get that information out ahead of the game as soon as possible. But overall, just by having the relaxed development standard, our planning entitlements, they're all mostly done administratively, unless you don't comply with one of the development standards or something. And we kick those out typically on a good submittal within 1 to 2 weeks. The review process isn't very long. The application is not onerous. And so I'd say most of the time ends up in the building compliance realm when they're trying to obtain their building permit. So hopefully these pre-approved plans, kind of having those already approved, and if there's a lot of interest in those, people will use them, and that'll help save on that time as well.
In some of the process things we did, I think we had a very interesting conundrum. Most cities run utility, like a water utility and solid waste. We decided long ago, as we were trying to really make this easier, that an ADU didn't have to have a separate address. You could use the same number of garbage cans, because that's a big concern for homeowners. If you have a second unit, you need 4 new garbage cans to go along with your existing ones. Is it another water connection fee? Is it another sewer fee? And so basically you have a choice now. If you have a separate address, then it's going to be more like a duplex. We use the same address for my ADU. We use the same water bill, the same utility bills. And that actually made it much cheaper, not just on a on the upfront, but also on a day-to-day, because you're not having to have separate bills for everything and administer that. I think the other piece that's interesting is when it comes to financing, if you are in the property records as a single family home with an ADU without a separate address, same utilities, your financing rates are going to be lower with an ADU that's not a separate address. Otherwise, they tag you as a duplex. I learned this the hard way when I went to refi last year to take advantage of low rates. I couldn't get the rate I needed because the county had tagged us as a duplex. So then I had to go back, get the county to correct that, and they were learning about all of the new ways between JADUs, or JDUs as Garrett called them. I feel like Sade could have sang a song about JDUs. And it was interesting. I got about a 0.5% lower rate by being a single family home with an integrated ADU than as a duplex. And so I see somebody posted about a fire department requiring a separate address. That's a policy decision that likely can be made at the council level unless the fire department's a separate entity. And so we worked through all that stuff. As long as 911 knows where to go, then it's not as big an issue. But I thought it's the sweetest JDU. Yes, exactly, Tom. Anyway, I thought I'd share some of that.
I'm really glad you brought that stuff up. We haven't on these webinars yet focused on this particular issue, but you are, and just for folks watching, and when we do a best practice guide, to remind myself to put this in there, it is absolutely critical to try and do this with a single address for all the reasons you cited. It's not only, number of trash cans and utility bills, but we're seeing in a lot of PG&E service areas, once 2 addresses are required, you have to have 2 separate utility meters, which is a $20,000 added cost and 6 months of waiting to get the unit turned on. And what we've heard through PG&E's folks and others is that a lot of fire departments are requiring the 2 addresses, but you could say, 100 B Street A and B, as opposed to creating, requiring a separate number. So it is absolutely important for communities to be mindful of that and to try when you can to set the 1 address, make that work, and then work with your fire department to find a way to label the ADU as A, B, or C so that they understand that there are more homes on the site and where they are, but you're not triggering a separate utility meter, for trash cans, and you're not causing homeowners problems with their refinance. Last week, we got an email from someone who couldn't get insurance because they got tagged as a duplex and they were getting homeowners insurance for a single family home. And we had to help them find another insurance provider who would work through that issue. So,
and what I really appreciate is that you guys have given the choice, because, while it works in a lot of scenarios, we also see homeowners that do want that separate address, and primarily, especially with, PG&E and other utilities pricing structures, having both on the same meter could put you into the next tier of pricing structure that would end up costing more monthly than your, and so it's a cost benefit analysis that has to happen. But, providing that opportunity to choose, and then providing the homeowners with that education about why you would choose to go one way or the other is absolutely critical, and something that most jurisdictions have a flat policy of yes or no, rather than providing the homeowner the flexibility. So that's
And
great.
these next gen
Yeah.
problems, mostly cities aren't even aware of. The homeowner finds out the bad news, whichever way it goes. And then they come to organizations like Maxable or the Casita Coalition or others of our members and say, oh my God, now I have to have 2 PG&E meters. So we're trying to kind of wind that back to the city. You guys got ahead of that and addressed it right up front, which is really helpful.
Yeah, I had to decide really quickly whether I was going to spend $10,000 or more to get sub-metering in for all of those things, and I just decided that it's more cost efficient, especially because I'm the landlord, and we can keep the rent lower overall, but we would just split the utility bill. And I'm lucky that we have some good tenants, but because of having an extra unit on the property, it does mean that you also have to maximize space on the property, and that's where having 6 garbage cans and everything, it just becomes untenable for most homeowners. They don't want that experience, especially as we look to reduce waste. We move away from natural gas and create electric building standards. I think it's going to make more and more sense, hopefully.
We have a couple more questions in the Q&A about pre-approved plans, and then also just sort of educating existing residents of small multifamily buildings about why, how this might be encouraged elsewhere in their neighborhood. So the pre-approved plan question was, what specifically are you doing on modular factory built pre-approved plans?
Yeah, we look very closely at the pre-approved plans, and I think that they have a lot of momentum. They've been around for a while, I believe, but they're just sort of picking up steam, if you will, and gaining a lot of attention. I think our plan in the future is to find partnerships with some of these builders, hopefully local, and just kind of make the connections from the homeowner with them. Maybe we could partner and get some of their factory built prefab units already sort of pre-approved through the building department. I know the approval process is much less, but there are still some hurdles that homeowners have to go through. So in the interim, we intend on having that dedicated webpage that will just really have a lot of factual information of considerations when doing a pre-built unit, what to consider, what are the building things you have to look out for, what is the homeowner still responsible for, like the permanent foundation, those types of important things that the homeowner needs to be aware of. So I think there's a lot more to come on that. I'm excited about that, to see how that develops over time. And yeah, like this program's just, I imagine it just evolving over the years and just getting stronger and better as this ADU stuff really, it's picking up steam and very popular.
On the prefab, I think as well, we talked about really having some prefab units that are within the design standards and can be chosen. And so, well, Garrett didn't necessarily mention that. I think as we turn to roll out pre-selected projects, it's going to be where a vendor might put their plans in to be pre-approved, whether manufactured or not. And you can look at a lot of different entities out there. If you get Dwell magazine, like I do because I'm a nerd, you see all these pre-approved ADU plans, or manufacturers, I should say. Not every jurisdiction has designed their ADU policies to welcome a pre-made unit that can just have the site work done and be put in place. But I think that's our goal here in Sacramento, largely, is to be receptive to a variety of different opportunities for people to create these units. Abodu is creating them on one end, and that's sort of a higher end unit that people might really enjoy placing. There's also more of a tiny home version that can be placed on a slab from Access Tiny Homes, which is more of I think an affordable / achievable standard for some people who may not have the money for a high design unit. And I don't say that to mean that it's not attractive, but I could see these cost decisions being made. And if you live in a neighborhood where homes are very expensive, your neighbors will probably be upset if you don't do something that matches the style of the neighborhood. So I could imagine these decisions in a lot of homeowners' minds.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned those of us who geek out on Dwell Magazine or other, available publications that show the ADU flavor of the week. We've come such a long way in 4 years where that material was not available 4 years ago because these were not widely legal. The LA Times is in the press weekly now because they're doing their pre-approved plan program and their small home design. So the amount of press that's available to help homeowners is encouraging too. And along those lines, when you guys do get your videos, I think we should be sure we're sharing each other's videos back and forth. We're happy to put them on the Casita Coalition website. And I'm going to ask one of our staff or comms people if they would post the YouTube link to the senior video that Casita Coalition did, where we had a variety of different family types, all of whom, sometimes a senior homeowner, sometimes a senior member of a family who had a housing need that was fulfilled by ADUs. And it makes a lot of the stuff we're talking about that can be very, wonky. If you're a real policy focused person, it's fascinating, but ordinary people can get lost in these details. And I think these video communication tools that are just storytelling are really helpful to homeowners who are not as well versed in the details of fire department addressing requirements for an ADU. So it's great you guys are doing that. Well, the other question we had to do with, encouraging existing homeowners, I guess, with like big homes. Do your policies allow them to subdivide those homes as you're looking in the missing middle zoning family? I think that was the question. I'm not sure. I think.
Yeah. And I'll maybe step back 1 second on, I think there's also a question about, how we're communicating this and making folks aware of it. And, we're really having a community-wide conversation around this topic for the first time at this scale in terms of what is our true housing need? What kind of city do we want to be? Who do we want to be able to live here and to stay here in our city? These are real things that we need to talk about. And what are some solutions around that topic? And so having these conversations and having new voices and stakeholders in Sacramento that haven't traditionally been there has been so vital to this. So I saw that Steve gave a shout out. I also want to give a shout out to our local YIMBY group, House Sacramento, who has been in the last few years a really vital voice that our electeds and other leadership haven't really heard from. We've also have our traditional advocates, our Sacramento Housing Alliance, who's been very important. And they have just recently come out and supported this strategy of missing middle, and where they've traditionally been more in the extremely low income and regulated affordable housing space. They also see this as an important policy shift for providing more lower cost housing options, but also addressing our history that I spoke about earlier. So I think a little bit, is the power of pictures and the power of what's already there and what's working already in our community. So, I challenge people all the time to go walk around your neighborhood, especially some of our established neighborhoods. You'd be really surprised at how many duplexes and ADUs and triplexes that are just already integrated in the fabric of your neighborhood, and you won't even know it. And it's really cool. So I'm on duplex, triplex hunt all the time because there are some that are just you just never know. I'm like, oh wow, okay, there's a second address there. I didn't even know. So I think that's part of it. Yes, and I see in terms of who's going to take advantage of this once the policy is in effect, where we can allow more units as a primary residence. I see absolutely renovations, rehab, remodels, splitting up homes as the low-hanging fruit. I mean, we saw that in the recessions of the past and depression, where we took a lot of our old Victorians and we turned them into fourplexes and triplexes. I expect the same thing will occur now. And so we definitely want to encourage that. There will be opportunities to condoize the airspace. It will be much more challenging to convert an existing into a condo. But if there's a new opportunity where it's a vacant lot or a new build, I certainly want to help facilitate that. We know that there's challenges with that that are outside of our control, that we're going to help with those barriers in terms of HOAs and condos and more liability around that. But certainly we see this as an opportunity for entry-level homeownership as well.
I think back to the equity point, there are a lot of homeowners who feel like the cost of buying it was such a stretch for them that if they can find a building where they have a second unit that can help them with that mortgage, it not only opens up young people, a lot of families who don't have intergenerational wealth, which, as we know, just from the statistics, Black families, Latino families, people of color don't see that same intergenerational wealth. And so it's an opportunity to find stability. And it's one of the reasons I've always had a roommate, is because I didn't have intergenerational wealth. And so the ability to create units is an enfranchisement and empowerment in this particular way. It is scary if you've never built anything, and that's why I think the toolkits are very helpful. Organizations like the City Coalition and others who can hold somebody's hand through it. And now we have this whole bevy of professionals, architects and others, who are much more comfortable in the ADU space than they used to be. And so that has also helped because they're providing more upfront education to potential projects for less sophisticated homeowners who still want to do the right thing, but need a trusted professional or advisor to get them through it.
Well, and you look at the average homeowner that's building an ADU, they've never built anything before. They've never hired an architect before. And so, really giving that, front end education to help them understand the process and understand both the benefits of something like a pre-approved plan, but also the benefits of having something custom designed, really is, key to making sure that, those applications equal permits issued. So.
Hey, Matt, we have a little goodie bag for you that we just posted in the chat room of, can you tell it's a duplex quiz that was published by Silicon Valley at Home.
Love it.
That is working in San Jose on missing middle housing policy and encouraging broader zoning reform in their single family neighborhoods. And one of their outreach tools was this test. Tell us which ones are single family and which ones are duplexes. And so far I haven't met anyone who passed the test. No one can tell looking at these pictures. So that's another kind of fun way to engage the community.
Yeah.
Have fun with that. Hope you pass. I didn't, I failed. Just does anyone else have any questions for the panelists? I want to make sure that we are getting all these questions out. There's one question. What about THOWs?
Tiny homes on wheels.
Ah, thank you.
I was waiting to see if you were gonna say it or knew what that was. So
I had no idea, but I obviously know what tiny homes on wheels are. So are you guys looking at that?
We are actually, yeah. And so it is one of our draft implementation programs in our housing element. So our housing element, we're slated to go to City Council in August for adoption. And it is one of our 48 or so programs. So we've seen other jurisdictions do that, and it looks like a relatively straightforward ordinance change, which is nice. So we are certainly open to that.
Another thing we learned on our San Jose webinars, they were very excited about their tiny homes ordinance. And once they got it done, the manufactured ADU industry kind of eclipsed the rationale for doing a tiny home on wheels. Some of them are bringing the price point down into the range of a tiny home anyway, but they're more savvy about permanent foundations and other amenities that people like. So San Jose was very excited about it, and then found that they have gotten relatively few permit applications. Yeah. So you might want to reach out to them and just debrief before you put a lot of time and effort into a tiny homes on wheels program that may or may not yield
Appreciate
benefits.
But I think, Denise, there's an important point there. When a jurisdiction can signal that it's open to a variety of answers and the creativity of the community, instead of and I don't want to criticize high design custom projects, which may be out of the range of most people if they're going to add a unit, you see people coming to the table with all different kinds of solutions. And it signals that your community is entrepreneurial and that those people who have different ideas are welcome. They may still revert, instead of to tiny home on wheels, to a prefab unit, because now they're in the process and they've decided that that's the value proposition that works for them. I still think it's important for every local jurisdiction to tell people we're open to these different housing options, and to come forward with your ideas and try to be, from a customer service standpoint, not just entitlement, but the building department, the utilities, ready to embrace them. And that's what's going to open up this democratization of the creation of housing. Not everybody wants to be a housing developer. They might just do one in their life, but we want that to be a great experience.
Yeah. And one thing specifically talking about tiny homes on wheels, I think there's some of the challenges that some of the jurisdictions have run into, and it just is the state of where we are, is that people see these on HGTV and Pinterest and really think of it as a DIY project. And one thing that, is a challenge is that these are still dwellings. And so really putting the thought into, as you're crafting an ordinance, how you can address making sure that there's that fire life safety, that's what the building code is for. And in a lot of ways, that's what makes building under residential code more expensive than building a, tiny home on wheels yourself. And so, being able to address those concerns and really look at how you can still provide the opportunities, but provide for the safety, especially if they're going to be rented out. I mean, it's not only a, fire life safety issue for the city, and the owner, but, as a potential rental, that brings a whole other side to the liability topic.
Yeah, I think that Steve's point is really well taken. That for a city that really wants to welcome innovation, signaling that right at the get-go by welcoming these housing types is a really important signal. And personally, I agree with you that it's helpful. I think it's very helpful for people to see that and know that there's like an ongoing dialogue going about how to do this. What's the best way? How do you meet all people? How do you really make it affordable for families? And it's going to change and evolve a lot. That we're really at the dawn of a new industry in California of building and delivering ADUs of all different types through different mechanisms quickly, more affordably, to a variety of neighborhoods. And it's a really interesting time to watch what cities are doing to embrace that and make it work in their jurisdiction. And as we get closer to the time on this webinar, I really want to thank all you guys from Sacramento and your colleagues in the planning department, building department, city council. Your mayor obviously has been a great spokesman for the importance of these sorts of housing forms. It's your leadership and kind of rearranging the engine of local government to embrace this stuff that ultimately will be the thing that makes the difference. That the rubber meets the road, that the local government permit counter. And if those folks are not on board or not able to organize themselves to make it easy, homeowners will stall out.
And I might just say, one of my former council colleagues, current council member Jeff Harris, he also built an ADU, is in the process actually over a reconstructed garage. And so I encourage all the local officials out there who have ideas about planning and development to test them by actually trying to do a project themselves. Because for all of them that want to create high barriers, high standards, they might get frustrated in the end with their own ideas and decide they should make them more practical. I like that.
I love that too. I think, and yeah, that's a great standard for anyone serving in a planning commission or a city council. Go get that permit, see how it goes, and then you think about how you might organize your time and effort. So I'm see, do we have any other questions in the Q&A? We've talked about modular. For folks outside of California that are interested in the ADU business, I encourage you to get on the Casita Coalition website, look at the HCD website, and see what the rules are and figure out how you might want to engage. Casita has been contacted now by leaders in other states, New York, Montana, Utah, about how can we do this in our state. So the lessons learned in these webinars about local government efforts, and then that paired with the partnership with the state of California, has really been instrumental in changing ADU outcomes in California and housing outcomes in the communities where they're working. So thank you all very much for your time today, for your great presentation. We really appreciate the work. Thank you for everyone for being willing to hang in and do the Q&A. I think it's the most fun and interesting part of these is the ability to just kind of get to know each other a little bit and keep the conversation going. You know, if you're not a member of the Casita Coalition, log on, join so you can get our newsletter and we can stay in contact. Do definitely share your slides. We'll be happy to share them out with other places around the state. And we'll continue to send you materials and updates. For folks interested in the ongoing webinars run by the Casita Coalition, in July, our next webinar will spotlight East Palo Alto, which has done an actual audit of all of their city council, city functions that relate to ADUs and how to align those. So we look forward to hearing a lot more about that. The keynote speaker will be Senator Nancy Skinner, who was instrumental in a variety of pro-housing laws in Sacramento, and herself the owner of multiple units on her property. And then we have upcoming webinars featuring San Francisco and in Oakland in August and September. You can register for these and track them on the Casita Coalition website. And if you would like to see a past webinar, they're all available on our YouTube channel. As I mentioned earlier, we will be issuing a mid-year guidance, ADU best practice guidance report that summarizes the lessons learned from the webinars we've done so far. And we'll do another update at the end of the year so that cities that are in the process of doing the work can find out what we've been learning from cities that have made presentations so far. And we welcome, as I've mentioned, you all to join the Casita Coalition, donate, friend us, like us, share your stories and information. Feel free to send us an email and help all of us work together to remove barriers to these small housing forms. So thank you all very much for joining us and for your good work in this space. And we look forward to seeing you again in a month, if not sooner. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.